Hello, and welcome to All Things Chemical, a podcast produced by Bergeson and Campbell, a Washington, D.C. law firm focusing on chemical law, business, and litigation matters. I'm Lynn Bergeson. This week, I sat down with Jim Adala, Senior Government Affairs Consultant at BNC and its consulting affiliate, the ACTA Group, to discuss the early days of the new administration, what changes we can expect at EPA generally, and key issues at the Office of Pesticide Programs that we expect EPA to tackle right off. Jim's unique perspective as a former assistant administrator of what is now called the Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention, and his keen understanding of the pesticide world always makes for a wonderful and insightful conversation. Now, here is my conversation with Jim Adala. Well, Jim, thanks so much. I've been looking forward to our conversation. We have so much to discuss, so thanks for being here.
Well, my pleasure, especially this seems to be a rather busy time. I've been through transitions before. This one seems extra busy, whether that's the chaos element or just concern or the phase of the moon, something or the other.
Given your triumphant participation in our firm webinar on what to expect when you don't know what to expect, in the new administration, we thought we would do a little deeper dive now about EPA writ large and some of the changes that we are experiencing and expecting, and then do a drill down on pesticide issues. So first question, Jim, what strikes you as the most impactful changes announced thus far? You know, we're recording in late January, so we've heard a little bit that will have, I think, very significant government-wide implications, but especially with regard to EPA-wide impacts.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm not exactly trying to get into the geopolitical element, but for EPA, which is big enough for our world, right, and our listeners, basically, I think the single thing, as it turns out, is remote work impact, just because there's everything from people who have, after COVID, ended up moving out, but are still very productive employees. And so if you say, well, no one can work remotely, well, then that means you lose those productive employees. It also means childcare arrangements and all the other things that go with it, and why remote work for a lot of employees are so attractive. And then more specifically, too, there's just sort of the general threats, is my notes in my head. The general threats, things like rescinding job offers. Well, tell me how that makes you feel about your new employer, or almost new employer. And what it takes to get a job offer in the government is not easy often, if nothing else. Recruitment and lower pay compared to the private sector typically, and things that once you have a job offer in hand and you've got someone lined up to actually take that job offer, and then now that's evaporating at the last second, if you will. And then also the general assault on certain kinds of positions, whether that be if you're part of the DEI purge, and how are they going to define that? Because maybe I'm not in that office, because there are offices at all agencies, including EPA, that are very directly kind of impacted. But even things like, well, no, I'm just someone who worries about some of these kind of concerns. And that's what I mean by the general fear and concern of everything from, well, hold it, he's talking about reducing pay, or freezing pay is probably pretty likely, given the budget concerns. But even the tenure, things like I can fire people at will. Well, that's a really scary concept for a Fed who's been around for more than 3 years. I used to like to say is, you can't fire a Fed after about 3 years when they have tenure, unless they get caught some underage animal somewhere in a place they shouldn't be. And so that's really a problem. And so that is a real cornerstone of the federal service. And it's a problem. It has other negative impacts. We could talk about that maybe a little bit later, but that's one of the kinds of things that really shakes the foundation of what it means to be a federal employee.
Well, we know there are some obvious pushbacks, the legality of certain of the decisions that have been announced. The wisdom might be reconsidered at a later date. But what other barriers do you see that will oppose these shock and awe early announcements?
Well, barriers are going to include everything from union contracts that do mean something, at least in some courts, and I assume you're the lawyer, Lynn, whether there's venue shopping and you find the friendly court or the unfriendly court. et cetera. I think the one of the major unions for EPA employees is National Treasury Employees Union, NTEU, and I think they've already filed suit. But then again, we're talking late January, so it's been a whole week, since all these new changes have attempted to be announced. The other thing, and a little behind
Mm-hmm.
behind the curtain, a little bit below the waterline. With all due respect to Mr. Trump and even his senior minions, they mostly don't seem to know a lot about the federal. They may disrespect the federal service, and that's their opinion. And they're in a powerful position to impose things in light of that opinion, and that's all separate from the procedures that it takes to get rid of people. And so the riffing procedures, reductions in force, which at the end of the day, that's the procedure you'd have to follow, right? You would say, well, there's going to be a budget cut. We don't need that office anymore because that's the decision of the executive. President has so decided. Okay. Except for those relatively very few positions that are subject to the, shall we say, the discretion of the president. And there are very few of those relative to the massive number of people in the federal workforce. Then you have to do a RIF. And the RIF procedures are something, again, our FIFRA audience may be more familiar with the concept of the some of the weird parts of FIFRA and how FIFRA is implemented. It's nothing like it makes that look like fourth grade simple, foursquare in the playground. RIF procedures are definitely complex black art, and partly because it doesn't happen too often. And you could have a real unintended effects. So, for example, it goes by seniority and job title. So many people at EPA, you might, not find surprising, are called environmental protection
Mm-hmm.
specialist. Okay, that's because they work at the Environmental Protection Agency. Makes every sense. Well, if some of the people who, for whatever reasons, have migrated over into the one of these offices that's being eliminated, whether it be DEI related or obviously for EPA, climate related programs, because the president thinks that's something that needs to be de-emphasized, quote unquote, and things like that. Well, okay, but then it might mean somebody in pesticides and someone who had worked in pesticides, for a time, not super long, but long enough to be a, fully trained, capable reviewer. And then they're called an environmental protection specialist just by way of how they got hired and other, again, all the fine print I won't go into. That person might be bumped by somebody who is coming out of the air office working on climate issues. And if they get bumped suddenly, and even if they're fully capable, but good for them, they're just not going to be working on climate anymore, but they're coming into pesticides. They probably get grumpy because they really wanted to work on climate. That's why they were there, number one. And two, with all due respect, they don't know anything about FIFRA necessarily. And you have to start the process again to get them trained up and everything else, in addition to the morale issue and all that kind of thing. So the RIF procedures could have really unintended impacts, and not just at EPA, any agency that gets any kind of cut, which again, the rhetoric right now is there'll be significant cuts. That's one of the kinds of things that's going to mean, okay, what's this mean for the operational programs that a lot of constituencies rely on, even if you don't agree with the broad emphasis on a certain policy or subject area. You still have impact because the government does a lot of things people rely on in their day-to-day lives.
Oh, and that has particular relevance for those of us in these very, very specialized areas like TUSC and FIFRA, right? Right, Jim? I mean, you just can't drag anybody from another EPA program office and expect them to be competent in some of the nuances of pesticide regulation, for example. So it really has very significant implications for many of our clients.
Absolutely, not even nuancing, but just basically knowing what the process is, what's a
Right.
what's a whatever. I mean, right? I mean, what deadline? I work in the air program. We don't have deadlines. We're talking about the global climate impacts of CO2 over the last 17 millennia. Whatever, you get the
Oh,
idea.
I
So
do,
it's
sadly.
well, it's going to be it's going to make a noise.
Well, and you had mentioned a moment ago, not just when people are riffed or their invitation to join the federal workforce at EPA rescinded, but that is going to have an impact on morale of people at EPA, prospects for recruiting down the road, and I mean, EPA does take surveys with regard to job satisfaction, I'm sure, but I would imagine all of the impacts of these initiatives and these transitional announcements are not necessarily good, right?
Well, sure. I mean, it does have an impact, everything, as you said, morale and recruitment, to say the least. But even then, your day-to-day job performance, you're worried about, hold it, I never really paid much attention since I got hired. I really am I have a science discipline, but at the time when I got hired X years ago, you know, 5 years ago, they called me an environmental protection specialist because that was the way to get in. Okay, now I got to worry about how many there are, those people of that title, not those people. It's got nothing. It's not personal. It's your designated category over in the air
Mhm.
program or somewhere. And so that's a real problem. You have a lot of people at EPA currently, for example, writing grants and giving away money. That's a lot of what EPA does. Again, people don't realize it, but a large fraction of their budget is giving big, cleanup grants for, say, sewage plants. So somebody may be a water engineer and very capable, but again, they may be also called an environmental protection specialist, as I said. So those are the kind of things, in addition to again, what's pretty well covered in the press, is there going to be a political purge, quote unquote political? Is there going to be Schedule F that blanks everybody at will, et cetera, et cetera? And the other thing I think it does, again, a classic issue across all administrations and transitions, no, it is a new administration coming in. They may have different opinions about how to interpret that part of decision making, which is subject to their discretion. So one person's political decision is another person's science integrity problem, is another person's, no, we're in charge now. We get to decide where the risk benefit lines are drawn, because notwithstanding some of the rhetoric about TSCA and FIFRA are both risk benefit statutes. And so, hold it, I'm valuing what some call the benefit side a little more than the other people did. And that's, of course, leads me, when I say other people, it leads me to my classic formulation of it's opposite day. And we have to do the opposite of whatever those other folks decided on issue Y or chemical X. And so it's, Mr. Trump ran against whatever Obama did, came in and changed a lot of things. And then Mr. Biden ran against Mr. Trump, saying he wanted to change a lot of things. And now we're back, back to that first one where Mr. Trump is saying he has to change a lot of things that Mr. Biden emphasized. So, and it's kind of the ping pong back and forth. And if you're an observer from outside of Washington, it may feel like a tennis match, but it kind of has serious implications for, again, the work that the government's supposed to do and for the kinds of things our clients care about.
Well, agree, and speaking of implications, what's your take on the administration's putting the kibosh on outside communications with the outside world, at least for the foreseeable future? I don't know if that's days or weeks, but, when some of folks on our team heard about that as we negotiate significant new use rules or pre-extensions or responses to 75-day notice letters, being told you can't call EPA and EPA can't call you is a little distressing. I've never heard of that before, Jim, have you?
Well, not in any of my time, and my time goes further back than I'd like to admit sometimes. But the the upshot there is, yeah, it's. I think they may be trying to close off. Oh, whistleblowers going running off to the press, but at the same time, that's what I mean by the day-to-day knitting and
Mhm,
work of the government. There's a lot of reasons to call EPA or have EPA call all kinds of stakeholders. At some level, that's their job, right? The public agency. So it's unclear those kind of unintended impacts could have. And again, even if they try and straighten this out in the near term, and do straighten it out on paper,
mhm.
then you still have people that are afraid within the bureaucracy. Well, hold it, they may do Schedule F, and I've been making a lot of calls. If I call back that industry person, is that going to be one of those calls that are they monitoring everything?
Right.
If people are worried in their home that their microwave is listening, you sure as heck probably are afraid that the government is continuing to monitor your workstation, your calls, and everything else. So again, it just leads to that kind of um, fear and morale impact that can be exhibited in all kinds of ways that you don't really expect ahead of time.
Well, let's pivot to the Office of Pesticide Programs. I know during our webinar, we had a limited period of time to do a deep dive on some of the really fascinating issues that are underway at EPA, OPP, but maybe you could just tick off what are the key ones that you think this administration, Jim, will be focusing on.
Well, the two biggest ones are ESA and PREA. In my book, I put that down as ESA, 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 just because that's the really huge issue for the future of the pesticide industry, one way or the other, mostly because of ability to get new products to market and the threat that if EPA doesn't have a viable ESA program, whatever else people think of that, then you're going to continue to see ports vacating registrations or preventing them from getting to market. And that's really cutting off the new products and the lifeblood of the future technology innovations and all kinds of undesirable impacts. And then the other one, not to make light of how important that is, but in addition, PREA, just simple throughput capability. A lot of our clients don't necessarily get involved with the new products, right? They're not the new actives, the new
Mhm.
significant uses, and some other things. It's just day-to-day knitting of me toos and small changes, quote unquote, trying to add another crop to a label, things like that. And you need people to process that. Non-controversial, no question about species, no question about risk, no questions about human health impacts or soil migration, et cetera. I'm sure we'll talk about ESA a little more in a second, but at the end of the day, you still need people to process that paper. So if you're looking at budget shortfalls, you're looking at the unintended consequences of a big cut across EPA, a 40% cut of EPA. That was what was proposed in the first day, literally, of Speaker Johnson's first arrival when he became Speaker of the House. There was a budget bill on the floor that passed, by the House of Representatives that was a 40% cut to EPA's budget. Now, how's that going to play out? Maybe that was targeted to climate and those big grants I mentioned before. Okay, we'll hold it, but a 40% impact, once it gets to the people part, we get into riffing, we get into
Mhm.
how the internal administration will allocate its cuts. So maybe the air program is going to suffer more than the water program, but back to pesticides, even within OCSPP, our place we care and love the most in our line of work, that there's going to be an impact because OPPT is going to be saying they really need, resources to undo their business. And at the same time, OPP is going to say the same. So that's the kind of thing where, again, it's not clear that there's an impact. Even if the target is the air program, you could have an impact over in toxics and pesticides.
Well, maybe you can, for the benefit of our listeners, Jim, just in broad strokes, outline, the Biden approach to ESA, writ large. Jake Lee, the architect of many of those initiatives, is no longer with EPA. He's with another government agency, and I think the consensus is there's some real progress that was made. What is the big picture overview, and what are some of the challenges with the current approach?
Sure. Well, I have to say, given the work that Jake and many others did, but he really was leading the effort,
Mhm.
as was his job when he came in the early days of the Biden administration. Their EPA has made significant progress on integrating ESA and FIFRA, and that's huge. As I used to say in all these kind of podcast and forecast documents, many have tried, all have failed. And I would say, well, there's certainly more than a glimmer of hope that this is an approach that can work. I'll get into how it works on paper, which not trying to be too snarky, but it does work on paper. But will it work in reality? Which is an important issue to say the least to to all involved. But basically, what they outlined was under the broad rubric of the key to the strategy is avoidance and minimization. The key way to make sure species aren't harmed by the potential exposure to a pesticide residue and from drift or soil migration
Mhm.
is to, prevent, prevent the exposure. So along buffer distance, for example, to prevent aerial drift, some kind of buffer around the treated area, maybe a filter strip to reduce the probability of having the residue, migrate off site and get into the waterways or other habitat areas and things like that. So that's the fundamental concept. It's avoidance and minimization through especially worrying about aerial drift and soil migration. And the way to approach that, what kind of label changes you would have to achieve those would be what they proposed is a point system. So a grower would have two things going on. What they would have the opportunity to have various mitigation strategies. So if you have a filter strip, you get so many points. If you use a big buffer area, a buffer zone, you have a number of points. If you have heavy droplets, your application method is a certain kind or a certain thing. Heavy droplets in a boom sprayer, ground boom sprayer, compared to aerial application and things like that. So all these things together can be a summary of the number of points that are become available to the grower. You then marry that to the estimate of risk, and that gets into a trickier area because EFED models over at EPA, the eco models, are not probabilistic based. They're basically here's where we think the numbers may be that if this exposure happened, then there'd be this risk to the species, a risk to the species, and so then we have to, in light of that, say, oh well, you're going to need so many points. Okay, well, and where the species live. So the two big controversies are especially the maps, the mapping about where the species might be, and then also the fact that, well, okay, maybe we find that a lot. I mean, that's a huge issue because the maps have sometimes been reduced by in the order of 90% of the original area that might be of concern. And so hold it, we need a whole lot of more time and effort to be able to refine those maps. And at the same time, with all due respect, what's the probability that there would be harm, even if your map is correct? Probability of harm. And that's where the issue, old issue with the eco models being used is that they're not probabilistic.
Well, let me back up for 1 second. Is there some rough correlation between the identification of risk? If you have a high risk factor, there's a presumption that you're going to need a whole lot of points. I mean, are those connected more than intellectually?
No, that's exactly right. If however they come to their risk assessment, probabilistic or otherwise, they're
Hmm.
saying you need X points. So the question then becomes, will everyone have enough available, or how significant an impact there may be? Now, at the end of the day, right, implementing ESA may mean that some places that pesticides have been used before implementing the ESA part of this might not be able to use that product the way it was used for the past however long, regardless of we've been doing it this way for blank years and all
Hmm.
that. That's what regulation is about. At the same time, the question is, okay, is that really necessary? Back to mapping. Like
Right.
we're not sure these critters are here, number one. And at the same time, you're saying I could still, use this pesticide in the way I've been using it on this crop. That's my main production for my operation. And hold it, you say I've got so many points are available, but it's not practical. So, for example, one of the things you can get points for is contour farming. Well, maybe that's not an option available to me. An issue that came up early in these discussions in the last few years was hold it, a lot of growers lease land as part of their operation for that year. If you lease land, I can't put in a bunch of
Right.
buffer strips and things. I don't control the land. I can't plant trees and wait 20 years to be able to use this product next year, et cetera. So there's issues like that. There was a recent release from the Soybean Association of some study, a survey that they, again, I'm not trying to defend it. I'll just tell you what it says according to the press release, and you can read about it on their website and things. But on the Soybean Association, they said at the first pass of EPA's just the herbicide strategy. Oh, I'll talk about that in a second. But for regarding herbicides, that only about 40% of their growers could even have enough of these points available. After EPA made more modifications and things, it went up to about three quarters 75%, a little more than 75%, or almost 75%. Well, okay. The good news is, geez, 75% of soybean growers can comply if they do certain things. All right. But what about the other 25%, right? That really matters if you're part of that 25%. And at the same time, on paper, I could do it. I could meet the requirement, but gosh, it's really hard. I use more than one chemical. I use more than one herbicide, even in a growing season. By the way, I sometimes have an insect problem. So if I have an insect problem, well, what are those requirements? Because EPA has created these things in big buckets called like the insecticide strategy, the herbicide strategy, and they're all coming out with the fungicide strategy and things like that. And someday it'll be even an antimicrobial strategy regarding these ESA concepts. And so all that is taken together really work. Again, it works on paper, and I don't say that lightly. It's a huge advance, but is it going to be practical? And at the same time, by the way, we're supposed to do all this, right, for every one of the 1,100 active ingredients, or about that many, and probably should have been done, fill in the blank, some time ago. Had to be done under one way of defining deadlines in 2000 and 26, and now that's 2026 is next week for some of these kind of purposes. People planning their crops, planning what kind of production system they're going to have over the next couple of years.
Are you expecting, Jim, or are you aware of anybody pushing for some wholesale reversal of everything that you've been talking about? I mean, we all talk a lot about, Congressional Review Act, CRA, and the possibility that, the new administration will get frisky using the authority and given it under that law. But what are registrants? Where do you see this going under the new administration?
Well, schizophrenically, although I want to pursue the frisky implementation of ESA, but the schizophrenia is the following. One is, yeah, there's some noises about should we use CRA to stop fill in the blank. Under the fine print of the CRA, things like guidance and policies could arguably be covered by the Congressional Review Act. It's not just a final rule, which is clearly on its face what it seems to be mostly intended for, and will be used in some cases. It was used when Mr. Trump arrived the first time. It'll probably be used now. People are figuring out what to stick in that package. Number one. Number two would be, well, okay, but if you didn't have this herbicide strategy, what is it? I think that the thing that's most helpful would be some kind of delay and further deliberation on things like refining the mapping. Let's figure out who really needs to, everything from when I say who really needs it, what critters really are at issue and where. And then also when a grower really has a problem, and just in any regulatory matter. We had the same problem over time with human health questions about, well, hold it, we really think there's a risk. Well, first of all, are you sure? Are you really sure? Et cetera. And the debate about that, and make sure, nope, we, the regulator, have decided this really is where the line stands, and it's over the line that mitigation must happen. Number one. At the same time, who's going to be impacted? Okay, who really needs this? On the first pass, it's many either growers or crops or growing areas claim they really need X. Well, is it really that you need it, or who's, the bottom line is who really needs it? And so that's a part of the discussion. And so allowing that kind of thing to operate in this space is probably what's going to happen. Arguably, it was going to have to happen anyway, even under a continuation of Biden-Harris policies, just because that is what the world needs to continue to say we're going to have, the robust kind of production that we have from our, ag producers. So, for example, 25, back to my point about a survey that seemed to say that even with these changes, currently 25% of soybean growers can't make it. Well, that's a big enough number to make a noise. Is Congress going to act? There is a farm bill that's going to have to be enacted sometime, presumably this year, according to most. And so The Farm Bill, in the past, the Farm Bill under Democratic Senate control was an unlikely place to see some concepts for relief, but now that's probably a more favorable form. And so, can the Farm Bill address it? And even deadlines, just even simply saying, all this is going to need more time. And as a result of needing more time, will Congress give it to EPA to allay the concern about courts intervening on stopping new products or current products and things like that. And the last point is just a concept of, or a concept of, a comment about registrants. Registrants and even growers, I have heard, even with the arrival of Republican Congress and Republican administration, I've yet to hear anybody, and I'm on a bunch of meetings all the time on the subject, that someone has said, "Hey, now that our, people who don't necessarily believe in environmental protection, let's just stop all this. Let's just start again and wait another, depending on how you want to count, 10 to 20 to 40 years." I've not heard that, and that's encouraging. But then the question is, now what? So what? So do we need to delay some elements of this implementation? Do we need to have better maps, and what's that going to take? How do we make sure that new products still get to market without and will meet the legal requirements, as the courts have said they must? And so those are the, shall we say, the outstanding issues that are going to be the homework we the community now have before us.
Well, lots to consider. And before we close out on ESA, I just want to let our listeners know that you had mentioned the American Soybean Association study report or summary of a study. It's called Falling Short: How Close Are Farmers to Endangered Species Act Compliance. A really good read and illustrates to a in very great detail, Jim, a lot of what you commented upon, the good, the bad, and the really needs more work kind of approach to the current ESA conceptual model. So it would suggest reader or listeners take a read of that if they're at all interested. It's on the website, on the ASA website.
Right. And I assume other commodity groups may do the same.
Mhm.
Certainly, I suspect they'd have the same issues. I know they will have the same issues, but have some survey data of whatever level of precision. And it also matters, again, this this is a whole issue. Just like I said about one size doesn't fit all when you're talking about cutting back government, right? You have all these unintended consequences. A historic criticism of EPA behavior in the pesticide regulatory space has been, oh, one size fits all. You people in Crystal City, now downtown DC, don't know enough about all the various ways. Only, even if you say cotton growers, well, it's a big difference growing cotton in Alabama and Georgia and Mississippi compared to Arizona and California. Oh, okay. EPA is aware of that, but what's that mean practically for how you have to deal with the regulatory issues has been a historic issue. Similarly, here, it's a big country. What may work for soybean growers, even if all those issues get worked out, may not be terribly relevant for fruit growers or tree nut growers in California and other places. And that's part of what has to unfold in this space about ESA, to all those very, quote, particular things, because it may be a small-ish thing, but if you're that producer, it matters greatly to you.
Well, as big as ESA is, there are lots of other issues OPP is dealing with. One of them, and we've already mentioned it, is PREA, the Pesticide Registration Improvement Act, the system whereby registrants pay a fee to have work undertaken with regard to their registrations. The system has had a lot of challenges, a lot of bumps in the road. Meeting deadlines has proved impossibly difficult. What do you see Trump 2 doing to fix PREA? Or is that even an issue that is recognized as one that needs to be solved?
I think it's recognized to be solved, at least by the people that will have to implement it. Like, so for example, I know it was raised in a certain way with the administrator to be confirmation hearing, Mr.
Mhm.
Zeldin. So that'll be something in his package. I personally predict, I have no insider knowledge, but I suspect and would be stunned if otherwise, that when someone walked into his office and said, Mr. Zeldin, as administrator, you're now in charge of pesticide regulation in America. He said, what? Um, and
How
and
did that
partly be,
happen?
Right. Well, I thought that was USDA. I thought that was my colleague over in USDA. Oh, no, no, that's us. It's not just climate and air pollution and water pollution and even cleaning up those ucky Superfund sites. It's you got to regulate pesticides and chemicals. He was made aware of too at his confirmation hearing. But the point is, kidding aside, is okay. Well, now what? And both chemicals and pesticides have programs, as again we mentioned a little bit earlier, and as our listeners really know for sure. EPA, if they're not in existence, if they don't have the resources, if they don't get their work done for whatever reasons, they're all worried about Schedule F or whatever issue, their pay and retirement benefits, and they're not focusing on trying to move the approval process through, whatever else about it, whether it's a good or bad or efficient or inefficient or delayed or not, at least it's there. And staffing, they've already talked about a hiring freeze at EPA pesticide program, that new people, and as they retire and everything, will not be replaced until they meet, certain, lower numbers of what they think is going to be the guidance and what they can afford to be prepared for. And again, that's on top of threats of big, quote, big EPA budget cuts. And it will again depend. And don't be too scared if you see billions of dollars in less EPA spending, at least proposed. Because again, it really matters on the personnel numbers and what they call EPM programs. But again, that's really getting into the weeds about the budgeting process. But staffing, EPA staffing, that's going to be a key separate element from even a big budget number. And so if you don't have people, you don't you don't get your approvals done at all, let alone on time. Back to your point about the meeting deadlines. And the meeting deadline issue has been a huge issue for a long time. It's not getting better. It's not going to get better, as it would appear in the near future. So does that mean you need some more creative thinking or new ways of trying to do business? Everything from improvements in the IT systems is, if Mr. Musk really bothers to follow up with his belief that he can help fix the government, that would be interesting. I'm not sure what would happen, but because the IT systems in government have always been historically pretty bad, or just, I shouldn't say,
Well,
they've
they're just
been,
antiquated.
yeah, behind the curve, right?
Right.
Exactly. The more generous, although pretty bad if you remember healthcare.gov, whatever. Anyway, so
No, you
the
needn't bring that up. I think we
and
get the
so
point.
again, it's just always slower in terms of adoption of the newest, latest things because Congress doesn't want to spend money on it. When people are really screaming at me about there's not enough staff to do the work, it's hard to get a big chunk of money for improving the IT system, even though that may mean ultimately it'd be easier to get the work out even with less people. And that seems to be a concept that's hard for Congress to sort of allocate for. Number one. Number two, again, back to recruitment, back to morale, back to the impacts of Schedule F and things. That's going to be that's going to be a factor. It's not going to help meet your deadlines. But you are going to need some new thinking. You are going to one concept I know in the pesticide space is whether or not some kind of further work done by the registrant before it's submitted to EPA. Again, you have to watch about it. The government needs to be the arbiter and the decider and make sure it's all independent and above board. And there have been cases where people have tried to manipulate data and so forth. And that's just reality. So how do you balance those out? I suspect that may be the case too for our friends in the chemicals program. Similar problems about what's the right way to interpret the law and requirements and things. That's another podcast. I think you can advertise that here at the end, I guess, Lynn. But I know we're having other podcasts on the OPPT issues,
Right.
which sound very similar in some ways.
Well, in this regard, they're exactly the same. And Rich Engler, our director of chemistry, of course, testified last week before the House Energy and Commerce Subcommittee, spoke about some of the really unintended consequences of significant budget cuts and staff reductions on things like the new chemicals program. It's, again, you're on a clock, and we need competent EPA professionals to deal with new chemical applications, just as we need competent EPA staff to review PREA submissions. And the tension between an administration goal of diminishing the federal footprint diminishing staff and resources is directly at odds with, having a functional new chemicals program and an efficient PREA program. So how these things sort out down the road will be the subject of immense interest, and industry and trade associations will be needing to do their job and educating the Hill on the need for resources and people and competent professionals to make sure that these applications are addressed timely and well.
I couldn't agree more. Number one. Number two, you asked earlier about the registrant response to some of these issues,
Mhm.
and Crop Life, as representing registrants, at large, has spent time and energy and political capital on lobbying for more resources. I know that at that hearing you mentioned where about Tosca in particular, but similarly, supporting the idea that you need those people to do the work, separate from disagreements over some of the
Mhm.
policies that underlie the decisions or perhaps delay things that some would argue don't need to be delayed and things like that. Even with my discussion earlier about ESA, the mapping may not be the greatest, or the practical availability of mitigation options aren't as robust as EPA would claim. Well, first they have to at least have enough people to evaluate what they think might work, and then when you respond saying, "Here's something we'd like to have you further consider because we're not sure it would work," or "Have you thought about this?" Any of those kind of interactions with EPA staff means there's got to be EPA staff in order to interact with. So that's all part of the part that, again, is not clearly apparent to people who just want to say we've got too much regulation or just cut EPA's budget. And that reminds me, I think we're getting towards the end here about, I don't know, to be my last point, almost nothing ever is, but the at the end of the day, focus on the important things instead of the sort of top line, um, you know, slash and burn or politically, either way, either to look, we ought to just regulate pesticides more if you're a different administration or something
Mhm.
like that. What are the foundational principles and policies that can make a difference in the longer term? I don't mean 100 years, but I mean just the foundational elements that would maybe make their work better. IT systems we just discussed for PREA, that would perhaps be one. But even just things like, should you take the time out, given that you've got political support perhaps for the next 2 years, assuming the House doesn't flip, that's another discussion for another time. But okay, should you say EPA should be using probabilistic modeling for ecological assessments? And that would mean that basically a pause and a reconfiguration of the way EPA does business there for decades now. And that would delay things.
Mhm.
Behold, it delays mean how do we meet deadlines? I don't even mean delays in getting approvals per se, but that could be impacted too. But is that worth doing? And having that kind of an assessment and strategic thinking about what would make the best impact to address some of these problems. So is it IT spending? Is it just staffing, simple throughput, just simple, linear, more staff means quicker and easier decisions? I don't mean easier, less regulatory, but just easier meeting deadlines and things like that. So that's the kind of thing, hopefully this new administration with a new era wanting to change things. We called ours reinventing government. They'll call theirs something else, and that's okay. And each time, maybe we need to have some of the reviews to say how are we doing and
Mhm.
how could we do better.
Well, in the remaining time that we have, Jim, I'd appreciate your views on particular pesticides or other key events that you would expect to happen over the next several months or certainly this year. What's on your forecast?
Well, I one of my favorites is dicamba. um, Dicamba is just is going to be approved with a new label. I suspect it will. Every time it's gone through a new label, the dicamba label has more complex training and restrictions and timing restrictions about time of year because it's a very valuable product, but a little bit tricky to use. When I say tricky, it's very contextual, site specific, temperature inversion concerns and other kind of to prevent drift issues and more training and things for the applicators. And That's just been, again, that's not a new issue, but one they're gonna face pretty quick, the new administration. Chlorpyrifos, ironically, our audience has heard about this now, I don't know how many years,
Forever.
but yeah, chlorpyrifos is another recidivist, is an issue where it is currently, the court's ordered that at least 12 parts of 12 uses should be continued because they met the EPA standard, even under their own pronouncements early in the Biden administration. And so does that, okay, so the good news is the tolerances are on the books. The bad news is there's no registrations because everything was voluntarily canceled. And so those products may be brought back to market. Will they, could they, should they, et cetera, may be something they face. And chlorpyrifos, by its, by its very history, becomes controversial regardless of what decisions may follow. Things like neonicotinoids, just because recently, and on the way out the door of the Biden administration, it was long, and it wasn't just a lame duck over the transom, as some issues were. But monarch butterfly has been listed as threatened, which gives it that has certain implications under ESA. And EPA is it not just the neonicotinoid insecticides, but especially those, as well as any insecticide, the potential impact of that listing and what that should mean. First of all, that listing itself is subject to public notice and comment. That listing is threatened. But in addition, over time, it's going to be a continuing issue. Pollinators in general still as an issue is relevant for pesticides, to say the least. And then also registration review, as I kind of in passing mentioned it, it currently has been put off by the last farm bill for a few years, but the question is whether Congress would see fit for the delay, at least the on paper registration review deadline for all pesticides, because between endocrine disruptors, we didn't even talk about that much, but the review of endocrine disruptor potential as well as ESA, and just that which makes a registration review is hard to do. It's a pretty complex process and one that's officially applicable for all 1,100 active ingredients.
Well, Jim, no conversation would be complete without talking about the ever popular PFAS. What do you see down the road in EPA's regulation of PFAS as it relates to pesticides?
Well, it's one of these old issues. Again, I think we could count sometimes some of these forecast documents and podcasts about the new year and how many years a certain issue has come up. PFAS is a little bit newer, but will continue, to say the least. For pesticides, most immediately, it's the issue of PFAS containers and PFAS treatment of pesticide containers will be an issue that could affect up to 25 or 30% of the containers of pesticides come in, number one. At the same time, the issue is not going to go away. There is some talk, again, with the Republican Senate, it may be easier now to have an agricultural product exemption bill. And that's everything from farmers who may have applied products on their fields, sewage products, in some cases, even industrial waste products, which turn out to have PFAS contamination. And then who's responsible, or if it's some kind of de minimis level, is it okay to continue, the crops that are produced or the products that come out of those fields and things. So that could be an issue that could come up in the farm bill or just even separately legislated. And Mr. RFK Jr., if he is confirmed and he has concerns about various pesticides and writ large, but in particular, PFAS and fluoride. And if people start to think fluoride's so terrible in drinking water, well, they certainly going to start asking about how much PFAS may be in foods. And that's a separate issue, regardless of RFK Jr. That, is there PFAS in packaging and things and in food products? As soon as you get to food products, people are going to ask, is there anything coming as a contribution from the pesticide side of the equation? And then last but not least, sort of the response to all that, even if then there's a move by a Republican Senate or by the administration to quote, what will be perceived by some at least as downplaying PFAS risks, you then invite everything from whistleblower concerns, claims of stifling science integrity issues, New York, what I have in my notes here, New York Times exposés or whatever other investigative journalism trying to say, oh, this is really a bigger problem than what the administration's making it out to be. So other than that, PFAS will be a minor issue over the next year, and something that we all have to pay attention to.
Well, there are no minor issues, that's for sure, and never PFAS is seldom among that category. But Jim, thank you for your thoughts on PFAS, ESA, PREA, and everything else that you do for the firm and our clients in the pesticide area. This has been a fabulous conversation. If anyone is looking for more information, tune in to our podcast, or excuse me, our webinar that we recorded recently on what to expect when you don't know what to expect in the new administration. And also look at our forecast document, which is on our website. This 120-page document goes into all the topics that Jim touched upon and then some, because there's a lot going on and a lot to monitor. But Jim, thank you so much for your insights. As always, we very much appreciate them, and we will continue to monitor all of these issues as the days and weeks progress.
Well, you're very welcome. And yep, as we always like to say, stay tuned, sports fans.
Thanks, Jim. My thanks again to Jim for speaking with me today about the transition to the Trump administration, and in particular its impact on the Office of Pesticide Programs. All Things Chemical is produced by Jackson Bierfeld of Bierfeld Audio, LLC. We will be back again soon to further inform and entertain you about all things chemical. Bye-bye.